Another obvious way of collaboration, but often forgotten, is around human capital, or what people often call now knowledge transfer on legs, which is equally, if not much more important, actually, than the kind of innovation and the collaborations with business that we've just been talking about. Both at the undergraduate and the postgraduate level, there is so much knowledge, there's so much expertise and skills, of course, embodied in the graduates and the postgraduates that we produce. And they, of course, have, you just can't assess the impact that they have both on the economy but also on our ability as a nation to be much more entrepreneurial and innovative. Consultancy is a more obvious one, of course. And again, the interaction of academics with a consultancy activity has increased incredibly. A recent survey found that 40% of academics at Russell Group institutions had engaged in consultancy services with external organisations in the last 3 years. And 19 out of 20 of the Russell Group universities use either a commercialisation company for consultancy or now have actually built their own institutions to manage those consultancy activities. So, for example, Oxford University's consulting, or it's called Oxford University Consulting actually, has got a huge international client base, including AstraZeneca, Microsoft, all the big names, of course, you'd recognise. Then, of course, finally, we have what in some ways I find the most interesting and what people do often think of when we talk about knowledge transfer, which are, of course, the spin-outs and also the licenses. Again, that tends to be forgotten in favour of spin-outs. And, of course, I just can't resist the opportunity to talk about a few of my favourite inventions, partly because they illustrate something key to the kind of innovation activity we want to promote further. One that some of you will probably have heard of is Renovo. And this is a great example, I think, because it's a fantastic illustration of the importance of serendipity. This is to do with a professor at Manchester University called Mark Ferguson. And in the late 1980s, he was conducting studies on alligators to try and find some kind of treatment for cleft palates. Now, he actually discovered he was making incisions in alligator embryos, and he suddenly realised that they seemed to be healing quite quickly and without any scarring at all. And, of course, he immediately saw, well, I don't know immediately, he saw the potential, the huge potential to apply that kind of process if he could bottle it to humans. And, in fact, that's what he managed to do. He did develop a synthetic formulation to mimic these healing properties, and Renovo is, it's a hugely successful company, although you might have seen in relation to our publication a piece in the FT which just was trying to point out as well some of the difficulties even the most successful spin-out companies can face in growing and continuing, and perhaps we can talk about some of those challenges later. Another favourite of mine is M10, which all came from the basic research, and we'll come back to that, from the University of Edinburgh. I love this one because it's about the holy grail of the oil industry. How do you find oil without actually having to dig for it? And, of course, the researchers at Edinburgh University cracked it. They've managed to find a process which does just that. So you can imagine the expense, the time and effort that has been spared by not having to dig and to be that speculative and exploratory in finding oil. So, I mean, the huge financial potential of this this discovery is pretty obvious. I mean, the oil industry is hugely lucrative, of course. Another favourite of mine, which is a bizarre one, is sucralose. I don't know if you've come across this, but apparently this is a King's College London innovation. In about 1978, they were investigating ways of using chlorinated form of sucrose as a chemical intermediate. And apparently one of the researchers was told to test this particular substance, and he thought he was told to taste it. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I don't care. It's fantastic. And he tasted it and he realised it was incredibly sweet. And of course, from there was born a sweetener that has made a lot of money. Now that example, of course, it's less easy to feel has made a huge impact on, quality of life or medical research. But it's a different kind of example which shows an amazing commercial impact of the research. And just to give you some diverse examples. Now, in looking at some of these case studies, we tried to isolate what are the key factors and the key characteristics which are fundamental, really, to promoting success. And our analysis found a few things. One of them is that the majority of the income generated from all of these studies came from a very small number of the licenses and spin-outs, largely from the MTEMs and the big lucrative discoveries. So just over 20% of the case studies accounted for over 80% of the financial returns calculated. Now, you can take several lessons from that. One of the lessons I would take from it is related to the endless political discussions we have, particularly at the moment where money is very tight, where there's often the imperative from government to try and get more money from business, from inventions. And, as I've said here, there's been so much activity, but there is a warning that it's a very unreliable, very uncertain source of income. You couldn't plan your finances on a discovery that resulted in MTEM company or in sucralose. So that's just one of the caveats that I try and bring out to government, when they get a bit carried away with the idea, well, this is the answer to the financial problem. We can just work with industry more and create more spin-outs and it'll all be solved.
A couple of minutes.
Sure.
Thanks.
I was told I could go a little bit longer, but we can talk about some of the issues actually in the panel discussion,
Sure.
which I think are relevant. So let me just, yes, perhaps we can pick up on some of these ways to improve knowledge transfer. This is where I become a little bit more realistic and not just very positive. And it just linked to these characteristics that we've tried to identify in our analysis. The other major discovery in our analysis, surprise, surprise, although we were actually surprised at the extent of this, is that the majority of these discoveries, inventions, spin-outs, licenses emerged from basic research and not applied. Some came from applied. But actually, a lot of them, and the examples I was giving you illustrated some of that, came from curiosity-driven basic research with a big, injection of serendipity as well, as I said, with the Renovo discovery. And of course, that raises the question of what's the huge difference between basic and applied. And I think Porter said that there's no such difference and that basic research is applied research just waiting to be applied. And I've got a lot of sympathy with that. But I think, again, for a message that we always try to get across to politicians, is whatever you don't suddenly shift all the money into what you think is applied research, because actually you may be jeopardising a whole range of fantastic innovations that emerge from basic research.